Today is November the 8th, 2011. My name is Roger Soyset. I'm here with Tony Hilliard at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where we are volunteers. With us is Mr. Glenn Carr, a veteran of Vietnam, who's agreed to share his experiences with us during his tour of duty in the U.S. Army. This interview is being recorded for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project through the efforts of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. Mr. Carr, would you give us your full name and address, please?
I'm Glenn Peyton Carr.
And would you give us your date of birth and maybe a little bit about your life when you were growing up?
Okay, I was born Christmas Day, 1934, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. I grew up in Shawnee in a construction family. My granddad came to town in about 1902 and ultimately built most of the large buildings in Shawnee, and my dad, of course, followed suit. So I had quite a construction background. I never left the state. First time I left the state was somewhere around my senior year. I went to Arkansas. Otherwise, all my time was around Shawnee and Oklahoma City. Went to Oklahoma State University, entered the ROTC program there, and liked it, did quite well. Graduated in 1958 with a Distinguished Military Graduate designee. Of course, that tendered a regular Army commission with it. And let's see, I graduated on a Friday night and left Saturday morning for Fort Knox. And 28 years, 5 days later, I retired. That's kind of the quick and dirty of it. I went through the normal schools that an officer goes through. Advanced Armor Officer Basic, and then Airborne School, then the Flight School. And my first aviation assignment was at Fort Stewart, Georgia, in a small unit there that supported a post with 3 or 4 bird dogs, a Beaver, and a couple of helicopters.
You want to explain what a bird dog and a Beaver are?
Okay, a bird dog is a Cessna L-19. It later was renamed the 01. It's a single-engine fixed-wing airplane, later used in Vietnam extensively for aerial observation. Beaver is a de Havilland, once again single-engine fixed-wing aircraft. That was a 6-passenger job, and it could haul small loads. It was used somewhat in a cargo capacity. There weren't many of them in Vietnam, but they were around. And Fort Stewart was mainly hauling VIP to Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, down to Eglin Air Base, flying support for training or evaluation of National Guard units. And of course, I met my later-to-be wife at that assignment. Spent 2 years at Stewart, and then went to Korea. We put off our marriage till after the Korean tour was over with. There I was a tank battalion, or correction, tank company, executive officer, platoon leader, and later I was commander of headquarters company. Of course, the time there was at the 10th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, and we were quite concerned that something might flare up, and that made the adrenaline kind of run high. And we had old tanks. I had an M47 tank that sometime it ran, sometime it didn't run. We could crank that thing. I remember one time an IG inspection, I told my platoon I wanted to crank all the tanks up and get them warm. Out of 5 tanks, when we cranked them up to warm them up, I set one engine on fire. We put that out, cranked the other one, it blew the dipstick about 400 yards back out across the motor pool. So, that was my first IG inspection. Quite interesting. From Korea, I returned to Fort Hood as the S2 of Combat Command B, which would now be S2 of a 2nd Brigade. And then later the S4, which is the Supply and Logistics Officer for the 502nd Aviation Battalion. While at Fort Hood, I participated in Operation Big Lift, whereby the 2nd AD was airlifted to Germany. Actually, it landed in France and picked up our POMCUS, that's pre-positioned equipment that we had for the, I think it was Operation, or correction, Op Plan 4202, something like that. Anyhow, we picked up our equipment, march ordered into Germany, and played a war game for about 2 weeks or so. And then we accomplished the real mission of that operation. We turned our equipment in to Pirmesens, Germany, because that was the time that France was leaving NATO, and we had to get our toys off of French soil. So we returned to Conus, the United States. And by the way, I have the distinction of flying over the Pacific and the Atlantic in a C-124. That airplane was the old Globemaster. It was commonly referred to as 2 million rivets flying in loose formation. So it was the airplane that was not supposed to be able to fly, but it did. Upon returning to Fort Hood, we participated in Operation Desert Strike. Not Desert Storm, but Desert Strike. That's where there were about 5 divisions met in the California and Arizona desert for a large war game. At that time, I had been given a brigade aviation section to start up from scratch. And we flew, I think I led the flight of 6 H-13s from Fort Hood to the California desert.
What's an H-13?
H-13 is a Bell helicopter. The civilian version is a Bell 47. It's the bubble helicopter, like was flown on the TV series MASH. And so we flew out to the desert, and I, of course, flew the brigade commander around. And he had the largest brigade. He was reinforced with artillery, infantry, and other armored battalions. I think we had 7 or 8 battalions in that brigade. And to start off with a big exercise, to fly that guy up above the entire reinforced brigade, spread out as skirmishers across that desert, was a sight to behold. It was awesome. George Patton was salivated had he saw that.
Oh, we see them all at the same time.
All at the same time. And of course, the desert sand, it wore those end connectors and road wheels just bright and shiny. Of course, at Fort Hood, they were crusted in dirt, mud, caliche, and all that. But out in the desert, they were clean as a whistle. We liked that. From Desert Strike, that was pretty much at the end of my tour at Fort Hood, at the first tour. Actually, that was my 3rd tour at Fort Hood. I started out at ROTC in '56, then was there a short period of time before going to flight school, and this was the 3rd tour, and there was another one yet to come. So from there I went to advanced course at Fort Knox, during which time my father passed away very suddenly after being notified that Mother had terminal cancer. That necessitated, of course, a compassionate assignment to Fort Sill, and I, at that point in time, thought my military career was about to end. It was a very hard time for myself. But at Fort Sill, I referred to it as stumbling into a caribou unit. That was all they had there that had the requirement for an armor officer. So I got a caribou checkout, and that unit, the 57th Aviation Company, deployed about 8 months after I joined it. And being still under a compassionate assignment, I was transferred over to local Fort Sill units, and we amassed all the separate battalion aviation sections under one, I would call it a conglomeration. I don't remember what we called it. But I was the commander, and we supported the artillery school with mainly teaching lieutenants and training the advanced course people in aerial observation. Fort Sill had learned from Vietnam that the officers, the FOs, were very weak in aerial observation techniques. So we put together training, worked with the school to flesh that out and teach these guys how to observe from the air. Funny part about it, it wasn't so much aerial observation, it was map orientation when you're flying. Even with Mount Scott sitting right out there in front of us, I could turn that helicopter around 180 degrees, these guys completely lose where they were. They could turn around and see that mountain, but they still lost their complete orientation. And that was really the worst part of it, was teaching them orientation with the movement of the aircraft. That resulted in quite a bit of flight time. And during that time, actually before the 57th left, I got ahead of myself here, before the 57th left, we were putting on a demonstration, I think it's called T-1760. It was an artillery demonstration, how the artillery used aviation to move artillery around the battlefield. And it went on, I think, once every 3 or 4 months. And I had a ground assignment during that time. And we had a Beaver demonstrating a short field takeoff. And he made a miscalculation, hit his barrier pole. It wrapped around the wing. Of course, he went into a steady left turn and still climbing a little bit, but it got worse and worse. The left turn turned into a descent, and he crashed behind the bleachers about 300 some odd yards. There's a brigadier general out there said that had the Olympics been going on there at that time, I would have taken all the gold medals in track. I jumped off the back of the bleachers and tore out after that to that airplane, and he said he had never seen a human being run so fast. I got to the airplane, and it had started on fire by that time. The fire trickled as I was running. By the time I got there, it was pretty well fully engulfed. I tried to get in there and get the guys out. I tried 3 times coming back out. I got an extinguisher that had been brought up, went back in second. Now on the third, coming out the third time to get fresh air, and I already knew I had burned myself severely on the hands and the side of my face and my ear. I was overcome by several of my fellow officers there. Says, that's enough, it's too late. They hauled me off to the hospital, and of course that resulted in the award of a soldier's medal. Flight surgeon did tell me something reassuring, that they were killed on impact. It wasn't because I couldn't get them out of the airplane. Also participated at Fort Sill in several artillery tests of new ammunition. I flew these PhDs and real technical wizards out just as soon as they fire a shell out into the impact area. We go out and observe the effects of it. That was a very interesting situation. And that's about all I can say about that, because at that time it was classified. I'm sure it's not now, but we won't go there. Along about that time, there was an agreement called the Key West Agreement by the Chiefs of Staff of the Air Force and the Army that gave the caribou to the Air Force. And to this day, caribou pilots will damn that Chief of Staff, Harold K. Johnson, because of giving up their airplane. But there was a side issue there that very few people pay attention to. And that was the quid pro quo that Air Force, you can have the caribou if you let us have full proponency of the armed helicopter. And fast forward a few years and look what we did. We revolutionized warfare with the armed helicopter. So in retrospect, that wasn't such a bad decision after all. And I can recall Harry Kennard's comment was that that was Lieutenant General Harry Kennard. His comment was, the helicopter has forever freed the infantrymen from the tyranny of terrain. And I tell you, no truer words were ever spoken. So from Fort Sill, as the Caribou Company departed, and I began to get my family affairs in shape, I called DA and said, hey, it's time to go, because I had been there about a year and a half, approaching 2 years, and guys were coming home from Vietnam saying, well, I just finished my second or third tour, where were you stationed? I said, well, I haven't gone yet, and it became very embarrassing. Being a career soldier is really embarrassing. So they finally let me join the 205th Assault Support Helicopter Company, 205th Chinook at Sill. It was ramping up to be deployed. I joined them, and we deployed out of Tinker Field in Oklahoma City on the 25th of May, '67. I had just had a operation on my foot, and I was still kind of painful and just a lot of discomfort. So I put my boot on long enough to stand in formation there to ramp at Tinker Field, the pre-deployment formation, to get counted. And I took my boot off and hauled up on the airplane, put my foot up on the back, the seat in front of me, and flew to Vietnam that way to keep the blood pressure off that foot, because it was really talking to me. We landed at Cam Bay, and then were trucked over to a place called Dong Ba Tin. And we called it Dong Number 10. It was a pretty horrible place. And they did give us a mosquito net that night, but I don't know whether I had holes in my net or the mosquitoes were smaller than the mesh of the net, but I was literally eaten alive. I knew that I would need a transfusion by dawn. I've never eaten up so bad in my life. But the next day, thank the Lord, they flew a couple of us out to various locations, to other Chinook units, for a week of in-country training, indoctrination, so to speak. Well, I was flown up to Quin Yon at Lane Army Heliport and joined the 196. That was the company that departed Sill prior to the 205th. So I was among friends again. I knew those guys, and that was really a reassuring point to be among that many friends at my first exposure to combat. So that helped out tremendously. So while that training was going on, the 205th back at Dong Ba Tin was finally repositioned to Phu Loy among the 11th Combat Aviation Battalion. They had 9 majors. I was the senior captain, so we joined up back there at Phu Loy for our new home station. With that many majors, I was just about number 1 for the latrine duty, the latrine orderly. I do know that there were companies, one in La Cape in particular, that had 23 majors. That was a problem during that particular time in Vietnam, that we were very top-heavy with rank. And that's why Fort Rucker and Fort Stewart were pumping out warrant officer aviators at a high rate of speed. But luckily, the 213th Black Cats, right next door to us at Phu Loy, the company commander came over and looked around, and he selected me to infuse. Well, of course, like most people, I didn't want to leave my unit that I deployed with. You know, I put up a fight. He said, "Now, Major," or Captain then said, "You've got no say. Come on, you're going with me." So I went over there. They had 3 majors. One of them was leaving in a couple of weeks, and I ended up being platoon leader. Shortly thereafter, company executive officer, and shortly after that, a short interim period as unit commander.
What was the constitution of a platoon? How many ships?
The platoon, we had 8 Chinooks. There were 2 platoons, 2 flight platoons in the company, and a maintenance detachment and a maintenance platoon. We would have had we probably had 16 aviators. I don't think we had extra aviators, but I believe it was 16 per platoon. And as a platoon leader, I flew and flew and flew to try to learn the operation and get very, very proficient. In the first 3 months, I flew up to the maximum time allowed, and I think it was 180 hours a month. The flight surgeon said, "You have to stop." And only on the 31st day, you could fly the same amount of time that was knocked off the first day of that 30-day period. So that went on for about 3 months and pretty intensive flying. I had virtually no additional duties to that point, so flying was the name of the game. When I became executive officer, I picked up a lot of additional duties, one being construction officer. And we had just, prior to that, they had just finished completing building the enlisted quarters, and they were pretty well taken care of. So my first task was to build a enlisted club. We built them a real nice building and had nothing but rocket boxes to put in it for tables and chairs. So we had around $2,500 in the impress fund. I sent a captain over to Bangkok to buy furniture. He came back with a plane load of furniture and air conditioner and everything else and still brought half the money back. It's amazing how cheap the stuff was in Bangkok. But long story short, we had one of the best relaxation enlisted clubs on Fuloy base camp. It was well known. So at that time I started working on the officers' quarters and improving the officers' lounge. Now you got to remember, this was the Black Cats. The call sign was the Black Cats of Fuloy. And the officers' club was officially known as the Cat House. So I need to depart here just a minute and tell you about the H-21 was the forerunner to the Chinook. H-21 Shawnee, named from my hometown, Shawnee Indians. And it was controlled by wire cabling. And that wire cabling was supported by blocks of material called phenolic. And it was a resin and fiber board, man-made, but it was finished very nicely on each side. Chinook didn't have any of that, but we still had the prescribed load list for one of those H-21 companies, and we had 4 by 8 sheets of that 1-inch phenolic it is. And I conned the maintenance officer and let me have that stuff to fix a nice bar in the cat house. So I built a beautiful bar and had a couple of locals come in and put the Naga hide on it, just beautiful. The old W4 maintenance officer came in one night and says, by that time I'd been promoted major. He said, "Major, I want you to know you got a bar that's worth $7,200. I thought, well, am I going to go to jail, Chief? He says, no, I was fixing to throw it away anyhow. So we had a laugh over that one. One of the highlights of that company that was kind of non-combat related, but I do want to point to something that went on in Vietnam and give great credit to the USO, United Services Organization. They did a great job of bringing entertainment to us. And one of those groups of entertainment was Martha Ray, her show Hello Dolly. And we were selected to host that show and to fly her around the combat area. So I had to build a stage for her. We put our heads together and came up with 4 stake platform trucks, put them together, and then covered it with plywood. I begged, borrowed, stole every sheet of plywood I could find in that area. And we put the various dividers up and the walls and what have you, and then backed up 2 109 shop vans for the dressing rooms on either side. Well, she just fell in love with that. Said it's the best stage she'd ever seen, especially in the combat zone. She loved it. And one of the male leads in the thing told me later on, said she was flabbergasted. So I want you to know she really was flabbergasted with what you all did at that stage. Well, that night after the show, we had them over to the company area and for a little party and what have you. And Martha and I sat down and had a little drink together, and we went out into the center of the yard between the 2 BOQs where I had built a fountain, a lighted fountain in a combat zone. And at the top of that fountain was a Vietnamese, the little Mama San hat, little triangular hat. And the lights were landing lights off of Chinook. And she just looked at that thing for seemed like an hour, and her comment was, "I shall never doubt the ingenuity or creativity of an American soldier." So that was something that stuck with me quite a while, and I really appreciated that situation. Later, 2 or 3 weeks later, she and her troop got waylaid down in Canto, I believe it was, at an air base, and they couldn't fly them out. They had to get back to Saigon to leave and go home. So she called operations and said, "Call the Black Cats, they'll come down and take care of us." So sure enough, about the end of the mission day, I got the call, says, "You're diverted to Canto to pick up Martha Ray." Well, between the word diverted and pick up Martha Ray, I got real mad, because I was tired. We'd worked hard that day, but they said, "Go and pick up Martha Ray." I said, "Roger that, we're on the way." We flew down to Canto, and we were stinking, hot summer day, smelly. They could smell us coming a mile away. We walked into that officers club, Martha Ray and her girls just threw hugs and kisses. "Hey, the Black Cats are here, they're gonna take care of us." We marched out of that officers club, and the Air Force was some kind of PO'd over that deal. I laugh about that still to this day. During that time in the Black Cats, we participated in what was at that time the longest Army aviation operation in history. It was from Coochee to a little village called Khartoum, which was west of Tet. That was about a 44-minute flight time. Chinooks got about 2 hours of fuel, so we could pick up a load at Coochee, fly up to Khartoum, drop sling load off, fly back, refuel, pick up a load, and that went on and on and on for the better part of a day. They had amassed 3, maybe 4 Chinook companies to do that. I wished I could remember the name of the operation, but I don't. But I do remember that the Air Force 4-star in Saigon said, "You guys will never pull that off." So that's too complicated. Well, old General Bob Williams, I don't know if he's a lieutenant general then or not. He later was a lieutenant general, I know. He was the 1st Aviation Brigade commander, or maybe he was USARE, I don't recall. He said, "Oh, I want to show you, this is going to go right." So Williams and the 4-star Air Force guy got in a helicopter, went about 4,000 feet, looked over this operation, watched it. And at the allotted time, a Chinook took off at Coochee and landed at the allotted time in Khartoum. And this went on and on. This Air Force guy was just beside himself watching the clockwork of this operation. And I think he lost a steak dinner over that one. But that held up as being the longest operation until Norman Schwarzkopf did his end run up Pipeline Road in Desert Storm, I guess it was. During the Tet of '68, there was a lot of fires in Saigon. We were stationed about, 8-10 miles north of Saigon. And of course, all that heated combat Tet of '68, fires were just overwhelming the fire brigades down there. And they asked us if we could provide any way to bring water in there to them. So we got our heads together, and make a long story short, we went down and bought a grain bin, some farm implement outfit in Saigon. We calculated what it would hold in water, and we rigged up a trap door on it and used the hydraulics off of the hook to activate this trap door. And we'd sling load that thing and just drag it down in the river, load it with water, go over the fire, and pop the door, and it put the fires out. The only problem is it washed the hooch away with it. So we found out we had to elevate a little bit, get a little altitude to allow the water to spray out, as a rainstorm instead of just a deluge. But knowing that the Chinook was the first modern large-scale helicopter, and that civilian aviation really had not been the recipient of helicopters to that degree at that point, we believe, can't prove this, but we pretty firmly believe that we invented the fire bucket that is used today in the Forestry Service, various places for forest fires. Once again, it's that old GI ingenuity. You just, by golly, you do what the hell you got to do and you make it happen. Another situation, during the dusty season, the Hueys were getting in this laterite dust on final approach to LZs, and the dust was so thick they were rolling over, going what we call inadvertent IFR, and they were just rolling over, they couldn't see. That dust was something like you've never seen. It was like sneezing into a can of talcum powder. It was horrible. So they asked us to do something. Once again, we got our heads together, and myself and the old warrant officer, Herman Linhart, was the maintenance. We rigged up a thing to go out the back of the Huey, in the Chinook, and had a T on the end of it where we'd spray. We tried it with diesel fuel. Put a blivet inside the Chinook, loaded up diesel fuel and a pump, and we'd crank that pump up and fly down the road, or the LZ, and blow that diesel fuel out. Well, that's when we found out that it was a tremendous backdraft in that Chinook. We turned loose that diesel fuel, and all of a sudden I was wiping it off my glasses, my hood on my helmet, the instruments went blurry, and we had to shut it off quick right then. Took the Chinook back, and the crew chief had to spray gasoline up there to get that diesel fuel off the instrument panel. Went back to the drawing board and decided we better hang that boom off the hook, which we did, and it was about I'm guessing 30 feet long. We'd winch it up with the inboard winch when we were on the ground, and we'd get into the deployment area, we'd drop it down. And that gave us also some clearance from the ground, which we kind of liked, and got the slipstream away from the junk we sprayed. We ended up using what we call cutback pentaprime. Pentaprime was a stuff the engineers sprayed on fire bases and airfields. It was asphalt, and we cut it back with diesel fuel, make it thinner, where it'd spray a little bit better. We tested that, worked pretty good, and the big deal came a week or two later, where the 1st Infantry Division was to put in 10 fire bases up Thunder Road, which is Highway 13, from Lycay to Quanaloy, or Lock Man, I believe. And we went into LZ1, dropped that down, sprayed, pulled up 50 or 100 feet, went into the next LZ, sprayed. Of course, at that time, the Cobras were going along either side of us, putting preparatory fires in. We had no idea what was out there. The only thing we knew was out there was a Pathfinder going in front of us, marking smoke. And we put that 10 fire bases in about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most. And the CG of the 1st Infantry Division, I think it was John Hay, not sure, but he was ecstatic with the success of that operation. We got all sorts of accolades, except from the Huey companies. When the crew chief jumped out to be sure he got all of his instrument off board and jumped back in, he jumped into that oiled up dust, got back on his airplane, and it took them 6 or 8 months to get that stuff off those airplanes. They were really ticked off at us having spread that stuff out. But there's no doubt in my mind or anybody else's mind, we probably saved lives, and we know we saved some aircraft from rolling over. So that was a highlight that I think may have been a first. Of course, we always wrote these things up in lessons learned. They're in the archives someplace. I don't know whether the guys in Afghanistan have privy to those things or not. But from that tour, I think I pretty well hit. I do want to say this about that particular unit. It was our motto to do what the infantry and the artillery wanted. Sometimes we had to throw the book out the window and do what God and the aircraft would let us do to serve the infantry. I know one of those things, I got called on attack early one morning. The weather was down to nothing. We picked up the load of ammunition, and I picked up, went through the weather. It was about 200 or 300 feet thick. Got on top, it's a sunny day. Had the radar, Saigon radar, put us on target out in the woods. And the unit on the ground said, "Yep, we hear you. In fact, occasionally we can see your shadow on the clouds." So I did a few aviation tricks up there and get myself situated, and told the guys on the ground to fire a flare on the helipad, fire it right straight up, and I'll call for it. So I got out of my racetrack and lined up where I thought the helipad was, said, fire that flare, and I'm telling you, that flare came right up the center post from that airplane. We bottomed the pitch, went right straight under that helipad, dropped the ammunition off, and boogied. And of course, that commander was Richard E. Cavazos, who later became four-star FORSCOM commander. And I served with him down there, and we had many drinks over talking about that little episode. We would fly, coming back late at night, deadheading off Attack E, tactical emergency. We'd call those units up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, you got anything needs to go back home? Any wounded, anything like that? And they loved just somebody being out there ready to help them. And that's what we were there for, and we tried to do our best to do that. We asked them to give us rice. Every time they captured rice, we'd pick 400 or 500 pounds of rice up and take it over to leprosarium north of Fuloy, and give it to the old padre there in the I can't remember what she was calling now, the mother.
You want to explain what the leprosarium is?
Say again?
You want to explain what that...
The leprosarium was a colony. Actually, it was kind of a hospital or an institution, maybe a more correct word, where lepers were kept. And they, of course, were still, and maybe are still today, not allowed or ridiculed in society. Quite frankly, I was very skittish about going up there my first time, going in amongst lepers. And I was assured by both medical and my unit personnel that it was safe. And by the way, the city of Charlotte, North Carolina had adopted our unit, as many cities did, adopted a unit. And Charlotte sent us literally a boatload of dental instruments and equipment. We fixed up a dental, I guess, lab, or what do you call it?
Clinic.
A dentist clinic in the leprosarium, and they were just excited over that, tremendously excited. I remember the first time I reached out and shook hands with a leper, and he presented me with about half a hand. It was kind of shocking, but here I am today with all of my parts. But we were proud of that civic action.
I bet.
I lost, I wasn't in command then, but I lost 2 EM during that particular tour. Unfortunately, it was from friendly fire. 155 round had a 100 mil error, and it wiped out what I call my RNU. Well, shoot, I can't remember what RNU stood for. It was my construction guys, okay, and all my supplies. I had a paint locker there. I had scrounged more paint than anybody in Vietnam, and that round set that locker on fire, and they told me it burned for 3 days. I was on R&R at that particular time. I could have very easily been down there at that time where those 2 young men were killed, because I frequented that area a lot in the EM area. I'd walk around just to keep command presence in that area. So from that tour, I went home, and by the way, going home, I linked up with the same 2 guys. 3 of us sat together in the seats coming over. We sat together in 3 seats going back home. We thought that was kind of a unique situation. And as you left the 213th Black Cats, you had what they call the champagne flight. I pulled a pitch out of Fuloy and told the operations farewell and good luck and all that, and they wished me the same. And just before we landed at Long Bend, the crew chief comes up and handed me a little small goblet, I want to emphasize small goblet of champagne. I downed that and landed at Benoit and bid the crew farewell, and that's the last time I flew a Chinook helicopter. At Fort Stewart.
When did you rotate back?
I rotated back in May of '68, 25th of May of '68. Fort Stewart, I trained W3 and W4 warrant officers in fixed wing. At that point in time, Vietnam was beginning to wind down. They were getting an excess of W4s, W3s that had several tours. They didn't want to purge the Army of that expertise. So they created what they call a transition course to fixed wing. And I taught those old salty aviators how to fly fixed wing, and that was a fun operation. They knew more about aviation than I ever knew about it, but they just didn't know how to fly a helicopter. Had a lot of fun doing that, and then I became the XO of the flight training division until my good college friend in armor assignments called me up and said, "Glenn, it's time to go again." So he said, "But I can't get you a Cobra transition." I said, "Jim, I don't want another transition. I've checked out and virtually everything that there is in the Army. I don't need another transition." "Yes, you do. You need that to get an air cav troop." So I went over to Hunter Field and got a Cobra transition, and left to go on my second tour. I recall my daughter, then about 5 years old, was just beside herself, clinging on to me, saying, "Daddy, don't go." That was probably the hardest part. First tour, she was too young to really know what was going on. But this time she did, and that was definitely, you talk about the lump in your throat. I mean, that lump about the size of a beach ball. But I just told her, "Look, I'm a career soldier. I have to go. I'll see you in a year. So you and Mommy have fun." And that was that.
What year was this now?
Going back would have been August of 1970. I was landing at the normal place, Benoit. I got sent up to the 17th group at Trang, I believe it was. The group commander, old Joe Starker, nice fella. I really liked working with him down the road. He wanted me to be his S1. I said, "Fine, Colonel, I'll be your S1, but I'm not leaving until I get command of the air cav troop." He said, "Oh, I didn't know you felt that way." He picked the phone up, and about 30 minutes later, I was on a helicopter going north to Pleiku, pick up command of the air cav troop. And at that time, we were pretty well wearing our Stetsons, and this is where I had the leadership tabs pinned on and given the guide on to B Troop, 7th Squadron, 17th Air Cav Regiment. And that started
Say that unit designation in B Troop what?
B Troop, 7th Squadron, 17th Air Cav Regiment. And of course, here's a shot about out front of my headquarters, shortly after I took command. At that time, the war was beginning to wind down. Combat was being curtailed at just about every level. The 4th Infantry Division had just left the Pleiku area, and we were tasked with kind of watching the back door, if you will. LBJ around January of '71, Lyndon Johnson put out the word, "Thou shalt not be any more insertion of American troops unless it's to rescue a downed aviator or recover an aircraft." So at that point, my Blues platoon, the aerial rifle platoon, we called them Blues, virtually had nothing to do. We were given ARVN scouts, ARVN being Republic of Vietnam Army scout platoons. And we trained them as our Blues, and we called them Browns. That probably would not be politically correct today, but that's the way it was then. And I'll tell it like it was. I don't recall inserting them more than once, maybe twice at most, into a combat situation. I did take every opportunity to insert them into just a benign area for training and to build their confidence. I knew someday we'd have to do it. The more training they got, the more confidence they had in themselves. Because let's face it, the helicopter was a new thing to those guys. Most of them are mountain yards, and technology was still a long way away from that place. We mostly worked for 2 Corps, Arvin II Corps in providing intelligence and on the Laotian border from probably the Chupong Mountains up to Jarang, a whole bunch of plays in there. I can't remember the name now. Dak To and Dak Suk, that's it. Dak Suk and Dak To was the northern end of it. And around March of '71, we had probably the hottest and the only battle in Vietnam at that time. It was called Firebase 6. Real hot battle. I think we were up against the 66th NVA Regiment, if memory serves me right. Of course, there were no American troops, large scale. They were small units. So small that I didn't even know about them. But we knew there were advisors out there, and the battle got so bad they didn't need air cavalry. All they needed was my gunships. They knew where the enemy was, so we didn't have to put scouts out to find where the enemy was. And we certainly had no place to insert my Browns at that time in this heavily forested mountainside. So my gunships went up there on a daily basis for, I don't know, 4, maybe 6 weeks, and just dumped rockets and 20 millimeter on that mountain till hell wouldn't have it. There was at that time, but I didn't know about it, a Medal of Honor action going on the ground. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. Well, I'll cover that right now. The Medal of Honor situation, fast forward 35, 37 years. We had a Medal of Honor group here in about 2 years ago, 34 of them, I believe. And Tony, you were probably part of that group maybe that...
No, but I know about it.
Yeah. And we were at the Coke place, Land of Coke, whatever, by the aquarium. Leaning up against the table there, just shooting the breeze with these guys, and eating finger food and having a beer here and there. And I said to this fellow, well, where was your medal action? He said, Firebase 6. I said, what? We compared notes and times and dates and road junctions and checkpoints, and it was Brian Thacker. I had flown gunship support for him, and not knowing what had gone on the ground, he didn't know other than the fact that he had a lot of helicopters. And he told me, he said, you saved my bacon. I won't say what exactly he said, but bacon will do. And of course, we bear hugged and high-fived there for 5 or 10 minutes. But it just goes to prove you how small the world can be. 35, 37 years later, I meet this guy that I supported while he was getting the Medal of Honor. I do recall one incident where I was probably the closest I ever came to getting blown out of the sky. I was leading the troop up somewhere north of Pleiku, and I'd call for artillery. They said, no firing, you're clear. We fly on along, and I had the entire troop behind me. And all of a sudden, the ops officers flying next to me, and I looked out the window. Now here's where everything goes into slow motion. It's the critical millisecond, but it goes into about a half hour. I looked down and there was 2 105 rounds coming up like that, probably 10, 15 feet below my skids. And I uttered, I don't know what, but it was something you don't want to put on your tape. And the ops officer says, yes, sir, I saw them too, but I didn't get a good look at them, but I think they were set on super quick. And I asked the gunner, did you see that? Yes, sir, they were artillery rounds. I says, guy on this side, did you see them? Yes, sir, there they're going. Well, I called this artillery guy back and I says, I just nearly got shy of the sky. My call sign at that time was Embalmer 6. Long story behind those call signs. And I could tell that I was talking probably to the fire direction officer. And I told him I got 5 people in this airplane that saw 2 rounds come within 10, 15 feet of my skids. Somebody's firing. So he said, I'll get on it. So he called back a few minutes later. Sir, our guns are cold. And by that time I was steamed. I said, whoever you are, you got a problem. That you don't have your area under control. Somebody is firing. By that time, I noticed a change of voice, distinct change of voice, and he answered with, "This is so-and-so 6. He said, "I'm sorry to inform you, I regret to inform you that we had an armament battery, started firing, and never called in." I said, "Well, 6, this is Bomber 6. I can tell by your call sign that you probably have the wherewithal to take care of that situation." He said, "Yes, sir, I do." I said, "Just do me one favor. Don't give me the coordinates for that armament battery, because I got 10 gun shifts behind me loaded, and I'm mad as hell." He kind of could hear a chuckle, and he says, "Yes, sir, copy." And that was the end of that situation. But that was a real near miss. But it was unusual and almost picturesque to see those artillery rounds. Apparently we were flying right over the max over. It was so graceful. If that can be graceful. Well, let's see, Firebase 6, that powered down. At this point, I want to talk about the climate in Vietnam. As you know, in the 71 area, mid-71 and on beyond, we were downsizing Nam. We were at the height of the disappearance of the draftees. Draftee usually draft for 2 years. Spent 6 months training, a couple of weeks at home, a week or two going over, got in a unit for a year. Now towards the end of that year, he had 6 months or less, and they became pretty undisciplined people no matter what we did. There was a group, I hate to bring this up, but I think it's necessary from a historical standpoint. The Black Power group was well known and very aggressive. Those were the guys that wove the shoelace bands on their arms. And the bigger dude they were, the bigger their band was. I had one guy that had his band all the way up to his elbow to the point it restricted the movement of his right arm. Guess what? He couldn't salute. So that became a problem. I was confronted with numerous discipline problems. I can recall back in the first tour, I gave the first Article 15 in the Black Cat Chinook Company. And it hurt all of us that we had a guy that needed non-judicial punishment. This year, I could lose track of how many I'd given one man. The guys that were just absolute renegades. I had good troops. First Sergeant brought me several requests for Army commendations, one for a Bronze Star for service. I said, who the hell are these guys? I don't know them. Those are the guys that are out there all night long getting your airplane ready to go the next day. So I'd make a point to go out at night and meet those guys. I had good guys. But unfortunately, we had a core of people that were just looking to get out, and they could cause all the hell they wanted to cause and have no remorse for it. That permeated back into the States as well when I got back to Fort Hood. Towards the end of my tour, or command of the Cav troop, I lost my first 2 of 4 people during my command. They were shot down in a Cobra. That was the hardest day I ever put, I think, in Vietnam when I lost my first 2 guys. It happened late at night, not late, but late in the evening. They were shot down about 5 miles, 10 miles west of Pleiku. And we couldn't get back out there. The wingman was almost weathered in trying to get back, but he knew they were down and there was fire. I stayed in the hangar almost all night long looking out into that area, praying that they would be somehow or another alive the next morning. But weather had closed in. We made a veiled attempt to fly out for a rescue, but weather wouldn't allow it. So the next morning we went out and recovered the remains, and I picked up one of them out of the cockpit. put him in a body bag. That's all I'll say about that. It's traumatic, very traumatic. But I did stop the operation before we'd taken the two guys, and I said, guys, will you join me in prayer? I want to pray for the family that's about to get the most earth-shaking notification of their lives. These guys don't need praying over now. They've done. We know them. They've done. I was thanked for doing that on several occasions, but I thought it necessary, and I think it helped all involved in this operation. Get back to that in just a minute. Very interesting situation happened after that. Later on, I lost two more. I think it was a test flight. They survived the crash, but later died from their burn injuries in the Playview Hospital. Once again, those are two of the most traumatic days of my life. So after B Troop, I stayed in command. Normal command was 6 months. I don't know why. I stayed in command 9 months. I don't know whether I was doing a good job. They just couldn't find anybody else to come in there and do the job. But I went up to be the XO of the 5th 2nd Combat Aviation Battalion. We were then attached to the battalion. So that was an easy move. Spent 3 months there and went home. Back to Fort Hood for my 4th tour at Fort Hood. And I will stop at this point and say that during my 2 tours, going and coming, I never, ever experienced being spat upon, booed, called a baby killer, or whatever. I don't know how I got around that, but it wasn't where I landed. I think I landed in McCord, I know one time. The other time I don't recall. But I was back here in the States seeing what's going on, seeing all this news. I said, well, how in the hell did I escape that? Just didn't see it. But I would say that once in a while, but then I saw it was happening. It was a bad deal. I got compensation for those feelings in the year 2000 when I was in the Atlanta Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association reunion in D.C., and we marched in the 4th of July parade down Constitution Avenue. And the cheers and thank yous, what have you, were just overwhelming. And I've since marched in one other parade up there on Constitution Avenue, same thing. And I'm satisfied as a Vietnam veteran that the public has, I guess we'd say, forgiven themselves for the way we were treated. At Fort Hood, I became the S3 and then XO of the 1st Battalion, 13th Armor in the 1st Cav Division. We were testing the Tri-Cap Division, whereby they were using armor, mechanized forces with aviation forces. Interesting time. Of course, that concept never really gelled too much. It did have some good things come out of it, but not as a triple capability division. One thing there that did happen that I'm very proud of, I was honored to have fired the highest score in the tank gunnery, and was the only field grade officer to qualify in the 1st Cav Division, as evidenced by this letter from Brigadier General Hale, Assistant Division Commander. I recall when the run was over, the firing run was over, he asked me, why did I only take 1 round, normally have 3 rounds to zero your weapon. Why did you only take 1 round and move out? I said, General, I hit the 2 before on this 12 of 12 target. What else do you want? And he accused me of being smart. And I got my gunner to back me up. I said, yes, sir. I told the major, I'll take out that right 2 before. I said, go for it. And I said, if he can take a tank round at 1,200 meters and get a 2 before, I'm good to go, General. And I think my progress downrange proved that. He said, damn you, something like that.
Where were you when that happened?
That was Fort Hood. I had a good crew. I treated them right, and they treated me right, and we tore that range apart. I felt very confident in the M60 tank. During that time, I had another highlight in my career was we were out on maneuvers one night and got a call to close up, go in. We closed in main post about 11:30 that night. I was told to go home, put my blue uniform on. I got back and they told me that LBJ had just, President Johnson just died in at Fredericksburg, and they were moving troops into Austin to prepare for his memorial. They didn't know whether they were going to do it in Washington, all in San Antonio. There was 4 or 5 scenarios, and the family did not make up their mind to the very last minute. Make a long story short, I was in the lead group helicopters that took off 5 o'clock the next morning into Bergstrom Air Base. Most of us in blue uniform or greens. Most of the enlisted people put in greens. They were used to drive taxis, sedans for the VIP and what have you. I somehow or another lucked out, was asked, I want you to be an escort officer. I said, fine, sounds good. You're going to the ranch. Got a qualm about going to the ranch? I said, no, not really. So I was designated to pick up President Nixon's representative to the internment at LBJ Ranch. That was none other than Beaver Rebozo. So he was carrying a Code 1, and he was also to pick up Anita Bryant, who was going to be the soloist.
What does Code 1 imply?
Code 1 is, well, the president is Code 1. A 06, I believe, is Code 7. It's a coding that's used in aviation to designate VIP on board an aircraft. Code 2 would be the vice president. I think Code 3 gets into the secretaries and 4-star generals. I used to know them all the way down to a full colonel. I think was Code 6 or Code 7, I can't remember. So I was escorting a Code 1 since he was representing Nixon. And Anita Bryant was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And of course, me being from Shawnee, Oklahoma, we hit it off real quick like. And I escorted Rebozo to the internment ceremony in the family graveyard at the LBJ Ranch. And here is a picture I dug out of the archives at the Johnson Library. And I'm the last guy you can see right here on the right side of the picture with Rebozo in the light colored jacket. So that was kind of a highlight of my career. Interesting thing going back. When we left the well, first, going into the, I'm sorry, I'm getting beside myself here. When we left the internment area, got him into the sedan, and it was Johnson's own vehicle with his own driver there at the ranch. And he took off like a bat out of a hollow stump, going to the ranch house. And the gates flew open, just flew open automatically, going up the way there. I thought, my God, what am I in here? I get up to the ranch house, and I'm met by Secret Service, and I was told that I was to give them this particular package. It was Rebozo, or no, I'm sorry, Nixon's present to Lyndon, or Lady Bird Johnson. I gave that to the Secret Service guy for his, to check out, and then Rebozo, I said, well, I'll stay here and I'll meet you at such and such time. Oh no, come on in with me. I said, oh no, sir, I don't need to go in there. Yeah, why don't you come on in? Major, come on in with me. So when the guy representing Code 1 tells this major what to do, I figured I'd better do it. So I bopped on in there with him, and next thing I knew, I had a one-on-one conversation with Billy Graham. And we were able to talk to all the rest of the, what I refer to, the busload of heathen at the funeral were coming up in buses. You know, 4 stars, diplomats, what have you. And so I had probably 20 minutes with Billy Graham until the entourage got in there. Then I found myself with about half of Hollywood and the other half of Washington. So I began to back off into a very obscure corner. until it was time for me to gather Rebozo and Anita Bryant, get them back to Austin. As we entered the car, Rebozo was a very nice guy, very congenial, and I was holding the door, and I got Anita in to slide across the seat, and her husband began to give me a fit about he wanted to ride up in front and talk to Johnson's driver. I said, no, that's my seat. So I got to ride up there. Oh, I said, nobody cares. Said, you ride back here and talk to my wife. So he got up in the front seat where I was supposed to be. So I was holding the door open, thinking Rebozo was going to get in there in the VIP seat. He gets in there and flops down the jump seat, and the only place left for me to sit was the VIP seat for the Code 1. The only saving grace I had was getting dark. Nobody could see me back there. So I figured, well, here goes my career. I screwed this one up. So we get back to Austin, bid them farewell, got them on their airplane back to Florida, I believe they were going, and bid them farewell. I was released back to Fort Hood. Completed that tour at Hood, got assigned to Germany to command the 48th Helicopter as a major. Well, on the way over, I got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and got straight off into Deputy Commander of the 12th Signal Group. And I looked up here on my collar numerous times to see if that tank was still up there. I went to DA and argued about that. And, oh, Colonel, congratulations on your promotion, but it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Just remember that. Go on over there and behave yourself. So I went to the 12th Signal Group, had a very interesting tour there, really outside the box, but once again interesting. The responsibilities we had ranged from the Moscow Embassy to the embassy in South Africa and all points in between. Was responsible for setting up communications for, I think Eisenhower, I believe, came over, had to put in the dedicated lines to the White House and all that stuff. But luckily, and also when they stood the group down, I became commander of a signal battalion, 63rd Signal Battalion. Then my luck changed. The first command list came out for 05 lieutenant colonels, and I was on that list to command the 3rd Squadron, 8th United States Cavalry, about 28 miles down the road. So I got back into the right boat and among my compatriots in armor and cavalry. That was, wasn't much to say about that particular assignment. It was an 05 command, a very coveted command, being a cavalry squadron. We did a lot of things, had a lot of fun, and was one of the first units on the border to face old Ivan if he ever decided to come across the border. So from there, I went back to the States, to Army Readiness Region 6 at Fort Knox, and for 3 years was responsible for doing providing armor training for the reserves, the National Guard, in a 4-state area around Fort Knox. That too was very interesting. Met a lot of people, influential people in the civilian side of the house, and got a real eye-opener to our reserve forces and what needed to be done to bring them up to par that they are to this day, where they can be deployed at a moment's notice directly into combat. At that point, I left to be an Inspector General at Forces Command. Once again, that was an eye-opener, especially to be an investigator. I investigated things that you never knew went on in your Army. And you have moments being an IG of thinking, my God, how did I escape from getting found out doing this? How did I get away doing that? Because you become the conscience of the Army at that point. And that was eye-opener. After the IG job, I went to Korea for a short tour, I had to take that short tour. We had to get out of ForceCom. They wanted everybody to been there 3 years to move. My daughter was a senior in high school. I was not about to move her, so I took a short to Korea and came back to 2nd United States Army, based here in Atlanta at Fort Gillem. Was the plans officer and later on the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, where I retired. And in June of 1986, at that point I was scared. I didn't know if there was a place in civilian life for me. I didn't know if I could talk civilian, having just completed 28 years and 5 days of military. So I completed all the honeydews, painted a house that summer, and then went to school for about 2 years to learn what computers had done to machine tools. I was an amateur machinist all my life. I went to DeKalb Tech and won several honors there. Their comment was, well, we've never had a lieutenant colonel as a student. Well, you got one now, son. So that was a fun tour. I did it all, although I was far and above in skill level a beginning student in that school. I just wanted to learn how computers were being used now for machine tools. Because when I first started out doing machining in high school, the word computer was not even in the English language. That resulted in getting a job at Saigon Thermal Materials in Decatur. I worked there about 2 years, became the chief of defense products, I believe. And within 2 years, I was plant manager. Our major product out of that plant, from the military standpoint, was the Aegis, the nose cone for the Aegis missile, and the Patriot missile, and also that company, their California unit, made all the armor, chest plates, back plates, and groin plates, body armor that's used today in Iraq and Afghanistan. Spent 14 years there and finally decided at age 67 I'd worked enough, and I got out, decided I'd try a retired life. And my wife will tell you I'm busier now than I ever was when I was on active duty, and I think she's probably right. I tell people I retired twice and screwed both of them up. So the one comment I want to come back to about that, picking that young warrior up out of that Cobra helicopter, my first loss. I was sitting in my office in Saigon one day, and across the email came the 17th Cav email with this lady wanting to know, would anybody know her father, Robert Long. And oh my God, what do I do now? That was my first. So I waited a day before I answered her, collected my thoughts, and I answered her. Make a long story short, she was absolutely flabbergasted that she was able to reach his unit commander. In the meantime, the wingman had come up online, and we both still had copies of the memorial service we gave there at Pleiku for Robert Long. We mailed those to him. And she wanted to know details, and I told her details. The squadron was about ready to have a reunion, and she asked, would I be permitted to come to that reunion? I said, oh, by all means. It was at Fort Knox, very close to where she lived in Columbus, Ohio, I believe. We met there at reunion. She had a nice family, 3 of the most well-behaved young boys. And that night after the banquet, we treated her like royalty. I happened to have the guide on the first sergeant gave me from the troop when I served there. Had that out on the table. And a couple of B troop guys sitting there. And I had the chaplain, who was a former B trooper, sitting at the table. And I went out and escorted her in, wearing my Stetson, and placed her at that table, and she was just virtually in tears being treated like that. After the banquet was over, Oh, we auctioned off challenge coins. They just had these challenge coins made. And they auctioned off 001 went to the commander, the original commander's wife. Number 2 went to the sergeant major. Number 3 was auctioned off to the highest bidder. This guy paid $300 for that coin, walked over to our table and presented it to the Cindy. Well, that put all of us in tears. Bannock was over, and I said, Cindy, I think you want to talk to me, don't you? She says, yes, I do. So we found us a secluded place in the banquet hall, and she started out saying she was 5 or 6 years old when the sedan drove up to their house. Of course, her mother was in anger. They didn't know because the body was not viewable. They had no idea whether he was in that coffin or not. I assured her that he was recognizable, and I picked him up. He was identified in the body bag. He rode between my legs in the back of the Huey all the way to the morgue at Playcool Hospital. I delivered him there. Beyond that point, I can't answer, but I can vouch on a stack of Bibles in my life that he was identified to that point. Well, she was very, very pleased with that. I went on with the greatest detail. He was about 6 feet tall, and his co-pilot was about 5 feet tall. Of course, obviously, they were named Mutt and Jeff. And she wanted to know all about Mutt and Jeff, and her dad. She did not know her dad. So we spent, I don't know, around 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know whether I ran out of answers or she ran out of questions, but we decided it was, she had talked enough. It didn't end there because I fly air shows, and we fly an air show at Dayton, Ohio about a year later, and I invited her to be a guest, a VIP guest there, and her mother was invited, Robert's wife at the time. So I had to go back through a lot of these high points that she wanted to hear from me. She heard from her daughter. And of course, there was healing going on. I suddenly realized when I was answering her email that I'm back in the Army again. I'm in civilian relations now, and I got to do this right, which I think I did. But now fast forward to Dayton, and I'm meeting her mother and her second husband, and it went pretty much as Cindy, her interview with me. Very pleasurable. They got questions answered. They were very, very happy to learn certain things about Robert and the incident where he was shot down. But I learned something that nearly tore me apart. And I made some observations to some high-level people. And I know to this day, I think General Hal Moore's wife, can't call her name now, based on we were soldiers once at Fort Benning, went to the Pentagon and tore that place apart on the notification aspect. Their notifications had gotten better, but I had written this widow a 2-page letter. And she all of a sudden just popped out and says, I never heard one word from anybody in the Army. Well, I literally fell backwards in my chair. I was so flabbergasted that this letter never got through the bowels of bureaucracy to this grieving widow. Well, I made a few comments to my superiors. Of course, that was 30-some years ago. You couldn't backtrack. You couldn't even backtrack looking at records at that point. But that was, if there was a low point, that was a low point. That I trying to do my job as a commanding officer, and it fell through the bureaucracy somewhere. That just wounded me tremendously, and especially on my first casualty. From an overall standpoint, this may not come out exactly right, but the only way I know how to say it is I enjoyed Vietnam. For the simple reason I was doing what I was trained to do. Back here in the States, you can train and train and train and train in those days, just so much, and it becomes boring. Thankfully, that's changed tremendously now. Their training is so just eons beyond what we're doing. The electronic media that they have now is just, it's mind-boggling. But over there, I was doing what I was trained to do. I was proud of what we did in that war. I think it was a just war. And I got reassurance of that when I went on an R&R in Australia. My first tour, I believe it was, my first R&R. When some officers, I visited several friends down there. They were very good at taking care of us, going out to families to dinner and this type of thing, you know. To a family, they expressed concern that that communist march through Indochina was going to end up in Australia. And they could not thank us enough for what we were doing. And that green ID card I carried was front row seat admission into any and everywhere in the continent of Australia. They loved us. And they let us know why, because we were, at that point in time, putting a stop. And as you know, the communist tide pretty well died between there and Laos and Cambodia. Gentlemen, I think I've about run out of gun smoke. Any questions?
Do you have any final comments, or?
Well, I'm glad that that the Library of Congress and you historians throughout the media have embarked on this project. I will tell you this: I was able to embellish your project at the Army Aviation Association meeting in Nashville last May, early May, yeah. When Karen Lloyd, who is I think she talked to you, Karen Lloyd was one of our board members there, and she had brought this information from the Library of Congress where she's employed. And we jumped on that, and I said, well, I know what's going on down here. I began to kick it around down there, and we looked at ways to get the information out of what's going on. I've since thrown it out to the National Guard here in Marietta, and to the Quad A folks here, the Atlanta chapter, and we emailed several times, and she's talked to Tony. At that point in time, I didn't know that we were connected. The Atlanta history effort was the same as the Library of Congress, but I find out it is, and I think it's a tremendous effort. I look around now, we're busting our fanny trying to get the World War II guys up to see the memorial before it's too late. And I think the Library of Congress recognized, hopefully in the nick of time, that we need to jump onto these old gray hairs to get their story. And I'm very pleased that you caught me, hopefully in the prime of my gray-headedness. I think it's a very, very worthwhile project.
Well, thanks. We do too.
It is history. I may not have contributed any dates that any researcher would get a PhD on or anything like that, but it's the way I felt and what I did.
Well, that's
Okay,
what we
that's
wanted.
good. We thank you for your time, we thank you for your service, and we really appreciate you telling your story your way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I overlooked in talking about my second tour in B Troop, 7th Squadron, 17th Air Cavalry, you'll recall at the onset of the interview that I mentioned my birthday as being Christmas Day. I had a very interesting a captain who was a maintenance officer in the troop. He was an artist as well. But he busted his tail to get all the aircraft up for my birthday. And I was told late that night that it looked like it was going to happen Christmas morning. So we planned, once we had the Christmas meal at noon and all the troop was fed, I invited the squadron commander, Colonel Ernie Smart, down to the ramp. And we had the troop formed up, and I presented him with the squadron maintenance report that listed all 27 aircraft as flyable. Here's a close-up of me presenting him that form that was very colorfully illustrated by my maintenance officer. And I still have that form somewhere, but I can't find it. I'm going to bring it. But as you know, when any commander brags on his unit that highly, as I presented that form to Colonel Smart, he said, "Well, Glenn, you know what my next command is?" I says, "Yes, sir." And I turned to the ops officer, I said, "Launch them." And we put all 27 aircraft in the air and did a flyby at Pleiku, and I was in the lead Cobra. So I thought that was kind of a unique combat experience.
Yeah. Getting 100% of any units
Yes,
with it up at any one
yes.
time.
We could do that in the Chinooks. We had fantastic maintenance in the Chinooks. My Cobras and helicopters were somewhat worn out at that point in time. But my Chinooks were probably a little less than a year old. They probably turned a year about mid-tour when I was in the Chinook Company. So I was blessed at that point.
Anything else before we close the tape?
Can't think of it. I could probably spin a few war stories, but they're inconsequential to history.
Okay, well, thanks again, Glenn.